Chapter 18. Nature. How far the Eddic deities are derived from animistic spirits of different departments of nature is a moot point. The origin of nature worship must be sought primarily in the fact that men viewed rivers, hills, trees, thunder, wind, and the like as alive in the same sense as he himself was. As he was alive, moving and acting, so things around him, especially those which moved or acted, or in any way suggested life, were alive. They had varying capabilities and spheres of action. Some were in motion: rivers, clouds, sun and moon, trees swayed by the wind. Some were vast entities: a huge tree, a broad river, a high mountain. Some acted or did things. The clouds poured down rain, the trees swayed in the wind, or brought forth leaves and fruit. Earth produced vegetation, thunder crashed and rolled, the sun gave light and heat. Some seemed beneficial to man, some were antagonistic. They did more or less the things which man did. They were alive. They possessed power. Hence, the more alive they were and the more power they possessed, man saw stronger reasons for standing in awe of them and even propitiating them. When man discovered himself possessed of a soul or spirit, he naturally ascribed such a soul or spirit to these powers or parts of nature. And as man's soul could leave his body in sleep or at death or become separable from it, so could the spirit or soul of a mountain, a tree, a river. Thus, in time, the spirits of parts of nature might be, and were conceived as altogether detached from them. Thus, a way was opened to ever-increasing hosts of nature spirits, no less than to the dowering of certain nature spirits, those of greater entities, example, the sky, a mountain, earth, sun, moon, with a more elaborate personality. These were on their way to be regarded as divine, as gods or goddesses. So also groups of nature spirits were conceived as having a chief, on the analogy of human society, and these in time might become personal divinities of a part of nature. Such deities tended to become more and more separate from the objects which were their source, more and more anthropomorphic, yet lofty divine beings, ruling sky, sun, moon, earth, sea. Hence the number of such gods found in all polytheistic religions, separate from, yet connected in some way with, these natural objects. They tend to become ever wider in their sphere of influence, yet betray by certain links the source from which they sprang. All deities were not necessarily nature spirits, but many of them were, though the connection may be difficult to trace. In Teutonic polytheism, some of the deities can be traced to a source in nature. Zeus was perhaps at first the sky. Odin, whatever he became in later times, may have originated in connection with the wind on which the souls of the dead were thought to be born. Thor is in origin the personified thunder, though this connection was forgotten in Icelandic literature, because in Icelandic and Old Norse, the word for thunder corresponding to the name of Thor had gone out of use. The connection of other deities with nature has been noted in discussing the separate divinities. Some of the giants originated in hostile nature powers, embodiments of frost, ice, storm, the mountains. Individual names of giants throw little light on their origin, but Thrym, Thor's opponent, whose name means noise, and is connected with Thruma, or thunderclap, is a kind of counterpart of Thor as thunder god. Another giant being, the eagle Reisvleg, who causes the winds, is a personification of the wind. So too, the Midgard serpent is the personification, in gigantic animal form, of ocean, as it was supposed to encircle the earth. In the following sections, we shall see how different parts of nature were regarded by the Teutonic peoples and especially by the Scandinavians. Earth. Jord, mother of Thor by Odin, is said to be both wife and daughter of Odin by Snorri, who counts her among the Asunjur. He and the skald Hallfred speak of her as daughter of Onar and night. The kennings for Jord were, among others, Flesh of Ymir, daughter of Anar, Odin's bride, co-wife of Frigg, Rind, and Gunnlod. She is also called Ljóðin. The hard bones of the green Ljóðin are spoken of by the skald Völustein. Inscriptions to Dea Ludana are found in Lower Germany and Friesland, and altars consecrated to her by fishermen. The meanings proposed for Ludana vary with the suggested derivations. These remain uncertain, as does the identity of Ljóðin and Ludana. Still, another name for Thor's mother is Fjörgun, which must be a title of Jord's. But there was also a male Fjörgun, Frigg's husband, that is, Odin, though Snorri, mistaking the meaning of Mer, beloved, or maiden, or wife, calls Frigg daughter of Fjörgun. In these two similar names or appellatives, we may see those of a primitive sky god and earth goddess, their son being Thor. When Odin took the place of the sky god, Fjörgun or Jord was regarded as his wife, and Thor as his son. The name is connected with Sanskrit Paryanya, Lithuanian Perkūnas, Latin Quercus, oak, and Gothic Fairgunni, or mountain. Fairgunna, the name of a mountain covered with oaks. Hence the supposition that heaven and earth, as a divine pair, were venerated on a wooded mountain. The union of such a pair was regarded in many mythologies as the source of all things, earth being a female. Often, too, there were parents of gods and men. If such a divine pair were venerated by the Teutons, what Tacitus says of Nerthus as Mother Earth is significant. Jord, Fjörgun, perhaps also Freya, were forms of the earth goddess. Tacitus speaks of a temple of the goddess Thamfana, worshipped by the Marsi, with Germanicus levelled to the ground. The tribes had held the festival of the goddess early in winter, and, when drunk, were surprised by Germanicus and put to the sword. Various derivations have been proposed for Thamfana. Example, a connection with Icelandic pamb, or fullness, pom, or abundance, with tafn, or sacrificial animal, and Latin daps. Thamfana was apparently a goddess of fertility, of harvest, hence a form of the Earth Mother. Anglo-Saxon formulae of the 10th century for restoring fertility to fields which had suffered from hostile magic are interesting, as showing how memories of an older earth cult survived into Christian times. The ritual was partly sacrificial, with spoken spells. One of these runes, Erke, 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 Jorthan Modor. The Mother of Earth, rather than Earth herself, was invoked. A similar Lettish phrase forms a parallel, Semesmate, or Mother of Earth. The meaning of Erke is uncertain. Grimm connected it with the traditional German Frau Harke or Herke. Some connection with Ero or Earth is also possible. The other charm runs, Hail be thou, Earth, Folde, Mother of men, be faithful in God's embrace, filled with food for use of men. This was said before beginning to plough. Folde, or earth, occurs also in as fold, and a similar appeal is found in Sigdrifumal, where Brunhild cries, "Hail to the gods! Hail to the goddesses! Hail to the generous earth!" The earth, as a productive source of what is good for men, and as spouse of the heaven god, lies behind these formulae. Ritual survivals of an old earth cult are collected in Sir James Fraser's Golden Bowl. Obscure references to the magic or strengthening power of earth occur in the Eddic poems, as in the formula from Guthrunark Vita and Yunlol already mentioned. In Havamal, earth is said to cure drink. Hence, before drinking ale, one should exercise it through the magic strength of earth. Because of the magic strength of earth, a newly born child was laid upon it. The vitality or soul of the child issued from Mother Earth. When the child had again been lifted up by the midwife and acknowledged by the father, it could only be exposed in exceptional cases. Scandinavian terms for midwife are Jord Gumma, Jordemoder, Earth Mother. Children or their souls were believed to come from Mother Earth, as this rite shows, and as is found in many folk beliefs regarding their coming out of hollow trees, that is, from the earth, out of ponds, lakes, wells, or caves. Connected with this was the rite by which men swore brotherhood. They let their blood flow together into a footprint. Another rite was called going under the earth. A long sword was cut so that its end were fast to the earth. It was propped up with a spear, and the parties to the pact crept through it. All then let their blood come from a cut vein flow on the earth under the sword, afterwards touching it, swearing to avenge each other, and calling the gods to witness. The mixing of blood with the earth signified that all had come from a common mother. Sun and Moon. The myth of Sun and Moon as children of Mundilfari has already been referred to. Sun is Moon's bright sister, and she drives the horses Arvak, early wake, and Alsvid, all strong, harnessed to the chariot of the sun which the gods had fashioned for lighting the world out of the glowing matter from Muspelheim. Under the horses' shoulders the gods set windbags to cool them, though in some records this is called iron coolness. Moon steers the course of the moon. The poems on which this account of Snorri's is based say that the horses wearily drag the weight of the sun, but the gods have set under their yokes a cool iron. In giving the kennings for sun, Snorri cites verses of Skulli Thorsteinsson, which refer to the sun as goddess. The Eddic poems also call the sun shining goddess, and in front of her stands Svalin, or cooling, a shield, otherwise mountains and sea would be set on fire. The sun is Glitnir's goddess, Glitnir being the sky, the heavenly palace of Forseti. Snorri also says that Sol, or sun, is reckoned among the Asunnur. When the giant artificer asked for sun and moon as well as Freya for his reward, this shows that they may be regarded as deities. Some of the names given to the sun in Alvismal are interesting. Dwarves call it Deceiver of Dwalin. Elves name it Fair Wheel. The sun deceives Dwalin, a dwarf, because dwarfs turn to stone if caught by its light. The name Elf Beam for the sun refers to the danger which elves encounter from it. In Voluspa, the poet says that the sun cast her hand over the rim of heaven and had no knowledge of where her home should be. The moon knew not what might was his, nor the stars where their stations were, till the gods held council. Then they gave names to night and new moon, full moon, morning, evening, midday, and vesper. This account of the sun is best explained as a description of the northern midsummer night, when the sun is at the edge of the horizon, but does not sink beneath it, and remains near the moon. This suggested to the poet a disordered state of things. Hence he added a stanza telling how the gods set order among the heavenly bodies. The analogy of other religions would suggest that with all these myths, a cult of sun and moon existed in Scandinavia. Caesar, on insufficient evidence, says that the Germans worshipped no other deities than those which were objects of sight and benefited men by their power: the sun, the moon, and the fire, Vulcan. This points to some cult or magical rites, and is partly corroborated by what Tacitus says. Beyond the Suiones or Swedes is a sluggish sea, supposed to engirdle the earth. The setting sun is so vivid there as to obscure the stars. People believe that the sun can be heard emerging from the sea, and horses and rays streaming from his head are seen. These horses correspond to the Eddic horses of the sun. Tacitus also tells how Boiocalus, king of the Ansivari, invoked the sun and stars. Caesar's opinion about a cult of the moon is not corroborated from other sources, yet superstitious beliefs about new and full moon found in later times may have existed in his day and have given occasion to his assertion. The Suevic prophetesses, example, warned the tribesmen not to fight before new moon. Sunna is mentioned in the Merseburg charm as one of the Idisi. Procopia says that in Thule, by which she means Scandinavia, the sun does not appear at the winter solstice for 40 days. Watchers on the mountain look for its rising and inform the people that this will happen in 5 days. A great feast is then held. In later centuries, the Church forbade the cult of sun and moon or observances in connection with them. They were not to be called lords, said Saint Eligius. The Saxon Indiculus Superstitionum mentions the custom of the pagans who say, Vince, Luna, at an eclipse. The Anglo-Saxons were told in the laws of Canute that heathenism honored heathen gods, sun and moon. The worship of sun, moon, and stars, new moon, and the shouting and noise at an eclipse, by which the moon was supposed to be aided, are denounced in Burchard's collection of ecclesiastical decrees. In folk custom there are many survivals of rites by which the power of the sun was supposed to be increased and fertility aided. Further reference need not be made to these, but the mention of the chariot of the sun in the Eddas is interesting because of the certain archaeological finds. In the Stone Age symbols of the sun were carved on stones in Scandinavia. Circles with or without inner rays in the form of a cross, or with several rays from center to circumference, or concentric circles, sometimes with an inner cross or with lines joining the two circles. These circles show that the sun was regarded as a disk or wheel rolling through the sky. This symbolism was continued in the Bronze Age, but now more interesting finds show the reverence for the sun in that period. In 1902, a bronze disc decorated with spirals and overlaid with gold was found at Trundholm in Sealand. It stood on a bronze wagon with 6 wheels, set upright on the axle of the hindermost pair. Resting on the axles of the 2 foremost pairs of wheels is the figure of a bronze horse. The wagon on which is the disk of the sun does not appear to have been drawn by the horse. Both horse and disk are on the wagon. Other representations of the sun, whether ornamental or used in cult or magic, have been found. A bronze disc with concentric ring ornamentation and with triangular pendants attached to the upper part of the disc was found at Eskelheim in Gotland. It was probably part of the ornamentation of a horse's trappings. More elaborate is a decorated bronze disc, 15 inches in diameter, mounted on a ring of metal, 6 inches deep, with 10 wheels, each with 4 spokes from a central ring. This was found at Justad in Skåne. All these different kinds of discs represented the sun. Snorri tells how Gangleri spoke of the sun's swift course, as if hasting to destruction. To this, Har replied that he who seeks her comes close and she cannot but run away. 2 wolves cause this trouble. Skoll pursues her, and Hati Rodvitnissen leaps before her, and he is eager to seize the moon. They are progeny of a giantess in Ironwood, who bears many giants for sons. Rodvitnir, or mighty wolf, is the Fenris wolf, father of the brood. This account is based on verses of Grimnismal and Voluspa. The former says, "The wolf is called Skoll, who in Ironwood follows the glittering goddess. Hati the other, Rodvitnir's son, runs before the bright bride of heaven." The latter tells how the giantess in Ironwood bore Fenrir's brood. Among these was one in troll's form, the robber of the sun. Nothing is said of the moon, as in Snorri's account. In Vafthrudnismal, Fenrir himself swallows the sun at the doom of the gods, but the sun bears a daughter before that, and she will follow her mother's path. This deed of Fenrir's belongs to the end of the world. The pursuit of the sun by his wolf sons goes on always. Both incidents refer to the myths of an eclipse as caused by a monster devouring sun or moon, which was driven off by people making noises. Snorri gives another myth. One of Fenrir's brood, mightiest of all, is Managarm, or moon-hound, who will be filled with flesh of all who die and shall swallow the moon, sprinkling heaven and the air with blood. This precedes the great storms and darkening of the sun at the doom of the gods. Snorri is paraphrasing and quoting a passage in Voluspa, which, however, speaks of the swallower of the sun, Tungl, sun, not moon, and not of Managarm, whom he must have introduced from some other source. Vafthrudnismal says that Delling, or Dayspring, is father of day, nor is father of night. The steed which draws the shining day to benefit mankind is Skinfaxi, a shining mane, the best of horses in the eyes of heroes. His mane burns brightly. The horse which brings night for the noble gods is Rimfaxi, a frosty mane. Foam falls from his bit each morning, and thence come the dews in the dales, a statement made also of the Valkyrie steeds. Night as daughter of Nor is named also in Alvismal. Snorri elaborates this. Night's father, Narfi, is a giant in Jotunheim. Night is swarthy and dark, as befits her race. She was given first to the man Naglfari, who bears the same name as the corpse ship in Voluspa, and by him had a son Aud. Then she was married to Anar, and from them Jord was born. Next Delling, of the race of the Aesir, had her, and their son was Day, radiant and fair like his father. All-Father took night and day and gave them 2 horses and 2 chariots, and sent them up into the heavens to ride round about the earth every 2 half-days. Night's horse Rimfaxi bedews the earth with foam every morning. Day's steed Skinfaxi illumines earth and air with his mane. This elaborate genealogy may be due to knowledge of such theogonic genealogies as that given by Hesiod. The Skalds worked this up, and Snorri has put it into prose. Thus, it is not genuine Scandinavian mythology. The parallels are night or nox, nor, Erebus, day or dies, jord, terra, while od perhaps is aether, and anar is amor. The origin of day from night is genuine mythology, as with the Celts and others, who held that night precedes or gives rise to day, darkness to light. The light of day comes gradually out of the darkness of night, whereas darkness falls over the light of day, extinguishing it. Man also, asleep and inert during darkness, rises to fresh activity with the light. A pre-existing state of darkness, out of which light and life have proceeded, is thus very widely presupposed. Tacitus says of the Teutons that they count the number of nights, not of days, for night seems to precede day. Delling's door is mentioned in Havamal. Before it the dwarf Theodrorir sang might for the gods, glory for elves, and wisdom for Roptatur, or Odin. This door would be that through which day or the sun came forth. In the Hervarar saga, one of Gestumblind's riddles says, "What is the marvel outside Delling's door, which shines on men in every land, and yet wolves are always struggling for it?" The answer is, the sun, the wolves being Skoll and Hati. Fire. Caesar's reference to a cult of Vulcan means a cult of the visible fire. Superstitious reverence for fire, example on the hearth, of fire as a sun charm, as a medium of sacrifice, or the like, may lie behind his words. In Scandinavia, a fire ritual was used in establishing a claim to property in land. Fire was carried round it, or a fiery arrow shot over it. Consecrated fires burned in temples, for such a fire in a temple in Iceland belonging to Thorgrim was never allowed to go out. There were also fires in the midst of temples over which kettles hung and across which toasts were carried. The Anglo-Saxon laws of Canute speak of the honouring of fire as the heathen rite. Need fire, fire kindled by means of friction, was used in many rites, especially when new fire was required. This is mentioned in the Indicular Superstitionum. De igne fricato de ligno, id est notfur, and also in one of Charlemagne's capitularies. Illos sacrilegos ignes quos nietfur vocant. It was used to kindle fire in time of cattle plague, and through such a fire cattle were driven, all fires in houses having first been extinguished. Bonfires at midsummer festivals were also kindled from need fire. Fire plays its part in Eddic cosmogony, in the Muspelheim conception, and in the final conflagration. The giant Surt with the flaming sword is guardian of this final fire, and he will burn up the world. It may be said that Surt was a volcano god or a volcano demon, originating in Iceland. A story in the Landnáma book may be cited in this connection. Thorir was an old man, his sight dim. One evening he saw a huge, ill-looking man rowing in an iron boat. He came to a house and dug beside it. During the night, fire and lava burst from this place and did great destruction. The huge man was obviously a fire demon, a fire giant. Fire was used in Scandinavia as elsewhere to cure diseases. Hence the sayings in Havamal that fire is the best gift for men, and that fire cures diseases. Mountains, hills, and rocks. Many hills were called after Odin, either as places of his cult or as indicating that the dead whom he ruled were within them. Others were called after Thor. Folk belief peopled certain hills with the dead, especially in Iceland, and these were held to be sacred. Hill giants are demoniac beings inhabiting hills, or personifications of the hills. A cult of mountains as such in Scandinavia is not easily proved. Agathias in the 6th century says that the Alemanni worshipped mountains. The ecclesiastical prohibitions include sacrifices, super petras et saxa, whether these are to be regarded as hills or great stones or outcrops of rock or megalithic monuments. Some stones seem to have been ruins of older temples and shrines. Stones, or lapides, which in ruinous places or woods are venerated, is a phrase in one of the canons of the Synod of Nantes. Examples of the cult of spirits dwelling in stones are found in Iceland, and the Landnama book tells how Eyvind settled Flatidale up to the Gund stones, and these he hallowed or worshipped. Trees. Trees and groves were sacred among the Teutons, the grove being a temple, a center of religious and political life, the scene of cult and sacrifice. Tacitus mentions several such groves in connection with the cult of Germanic deities, the Silva Herculi Sacra near the Weser, the Lucas Baduhene in northwest Germany, the grove where the Simones sacrificed to the Regnator Omnium Deus, the island Castum Nemus or Thnerthus, the grove where the brothers called Alces were worshipped. Lives of Christian missionaries and other documents show the reverence for such groves at a later time among the Frisians, Lombards, Saxons, and others. On the branches of the trees, sacrificial victims were hung. Adam of Bremen describes a grove near Uppsala where animals were sacrificed, and other groves were sacred in Scandinavia. We read in the Landnama book of the Icelander Thor, who hallowed and worshipped a grove and offered sacrifice to it. Where Christianity prevailed, such groves were cut down and destroyed. Single trees were also held sacred, such as those worshipped by the Alemanni, mentioned by Agathias, or others spoken of in contemporary documents over a period of several centuries. They were sacred in themselves or dedicated to a god. Example, the Robur Jovis, dedicated to Donar at Geismar, or the huge tree with spreading branches, evergreen in winter at Uppsala, with a spring beside it at which sacrifices were offered. A living man was sometimes thrown into the spring, and the whole place was taboo. Trees were associated with the souls of the dead, with elfins and spirits, as well as with the spirit indwelling in the tree. Many superstitions prove this, and trees, branches, and twigs figure prominently in fertility rites. As spirits of the dead dwelt in trees, so the Swedish tomte or brownie, successor to an ancestral ghost, dwells in the vartrad, or ward tree, the lime or elm growing before the house. If it is cut down, the prosperity of the house ceases, or again, the tomte dies with the tree, and then dwells in the house in the rafters made from it. The tomte acts as a guardian spirit of the house and family. Such protective trees are also associated with the community. Analogous to this is the North German belief in the Klabautermann, a helpful brownie of a ship, dwelling in the mast made from a tree, which as a sapling was split in order to pass a sickly child through it, and then joined together again. If the child died, its soul passed into the tree. Such trees have a peculiar form after this treatment and are used in shipbuilding. As we shall see in a later chapter, the mythic ash Yggdrasil and the tree Leirad are linked to such sacred trees as the Vartrad and the sacred tree described by Adam of Bremen. There may be a hint at the sacredness of trees in the myth of the creation of Ask and Embla out of tree stumps. Earlier and later folk belief knew many varieties of more or less elfin beings connected with the woods, in whom may be seen earlier forest spirits, sometimes in new shapes and names. The fairies and fays were fond of the woodlands, though these are seldom directly linked to tree spirits, except where trees are sacred to certain elves, or where mortals sleeping below trees are subject to fairy enchantment. Even particularly, woodland or tree elfins are more or less independent of their environment. The spirit animating a tree, rock, or stream always tended to be separable from it, and as there are many trees, rocks, or parts of a river, there would be many spirits animating these, but apt to appear apart from them and to assume a distinct form. Teutonic folklore knows the distinctive forest elfins by different names: Skrato, Holzmoa, Holzruna, Waldminne. In South Germany, Fangen, Saligen, or Saligefrolin. Blessed maids, a euphemism. Wilde Leute. In mid-Germany, Moosweibel, Moosfraulin, Holz, or Buschfrauen. In North Germany, they are little known or have assumed the qualities of dwarves. Corresponding to these are the Danish Skogsnuffa, or forest maidens, Askefruer, or ash women, the Swedish Skogsra, or wood goblin, Skogsfru, or woodwife, and the Lofviska. Male wood spirits are less common. Waldmanlein, Wildmanel, Skrat, and the Swedish Skogsman. Devetja, a female forest being mentioned in Yunloljod, and the troll wives called Jarenvitja, or Ironwood women, by Snorri, were more monstrous than elfin, and nothing definite is known of them. The Teutonic Skrat, or Skrato, or Latin Pilosus, is a wild, shaggy male wood spirit, also a form of the nightmare spirit, with eyebrows meeting, who appears singly. Another form is Skratel, or Skretzel, a small elfin in houses. The woodland Skrat is akin to the fauns of classic tradition and to the tree spirits of Teutonic paganism, to whom temples and trees were dedicated. The Wildu Whip of early Teutonic belief were beautiful, long-haired forest spirits, usually appearing singly. They are the Agrestes Feminae mentioned by Bouchard, who says that when they will, they show themselves to their lovers, and with them these say they have pleasure, and when they will, they leave them and vanish. In Gudrun, Waite learned the healing art from one of them. They were famed for spinning. In one version of Wolf Dietrich, to the sleeping hero came a shaggy woodwife, Rauh Else, or Rauh Els, on all fours like a bear, asking his love. He called her a devil's child. She cast spells over him, and he became like Nebuchadnezzar. When she next sought his love, he agreed, if she would be baptized. She carried him to her own land, bathed in a fountain of youth, and became the lovely Sigememne. Similar amours occur in later story, and such Wildu Whip and Agrestes Feminae resemble the Pulae, Dominae, Matronae, seen in forests in medieval legend, native Teutonic fays, like Saxo's Virginis Sylvestris and the Eddic Swan Maidens who loved the forest. The Moos and Holzweibel and Buschfrauen, akin to dwarves, though taller, live in companies in the heath, in hollow trees, or underground, though they also appear singly. They may be golden-haired, but are mostly shaggy, clad in moss or with moss on their faces, which are old and wrinkled. Their backs are hollow, their breasts pendant. The shaggy, mossy woodland gave the type of these woodland folk, of Rauh-els, and of the fauns. The less common males of these groups are both kindly and tricky to the woodman. They have a queen, the bush grossmutter. They beg or take food. When bread is baked, a loaf is left for them at a certain spot, for which one of their own loaves is afterward placed in a furrow or on the plough, and they are angry if it is not accepted. For other services, they give a reward of a twig or leaves, which afterwards turn to gold. They both cause and cure diseases. As worms or insects, they creep from trees into men's bodies, and these must then wish them back into the tree in order to be rid of them. But in time of plague, a Holsfrolin will give herbs which are effective against it. And if a wild Munline was caught and intoxicated, she supplied secret knowledge, that is, of cures. On the whole, these Teutonic woodfolk are kindly. They help with harvesting, hire themselves to peasants, tend cattle, and bring good luck to the house. Or one will act like a kobold or brownie in a house, requiring only bread and cheese as wages. Woodfolk care for and protect the creatures of the wild. The Skogsfru is lady of those pursued by the hunter, and may put him on their track. Sometimes the woodfolk themselves appear as animals, the Holsfrauen as owls, the Saligfrauen of Tyrol as vultures, guarding the chamois, the Fangen as wild cats. The Danish and Swedish woodwife has a semi-animal form, or wears beast skins or a cow's tail. Woodwives and moosewives are pursued by the wild huntsman or the devil, and seek human protection. 3 crosses were marked on a fallen tree in order that the woodwife might sit within them, for the wild hunter fears the cross, and for such aid men were richly rewarded. But a woodcutter who refused this aid was seized and clasped by a moosewife, and afterwards became ill. A peasant who mimicked the hunter as he pursued a moosewife found part of a body hanging at his door next morning. This pursuit of the woodwives resembles the North German belief in the wind's bride, driven before the hunter. Some of the woodfolk are earlier tree spirits. Whoever would fell a tree must kneel before it with uncovered head and folded hands. In Denmark, where the elder mother dwelt under an elder tree, he who desired to take part of it had to ask her permission thrice. The life of the Fang is bound up with that of a tree, like a dryad's. If anyone twists a young tree until the bark comes off, a woodwife dies, for she lives beneath the bark. All this is in accord with animistic beliefs about tree spirits. The antiquity of the woodfolk, as compared with man and his modern ways, is seen in their preference for old methods. They say that there has never been a good time since people began to count the dumplings in the pot and the loaves in the oven, or to pip or mark loaves and put caraway seeds in them, which they cannot endure, a distaste shared by certain dwarfs. Hence they cannot now enjoy the peasant's bread, and thence in turn lose their prosperity. Where the woodfolk are supposed to dwell together, as in mid-Germany, they have many elfin and dwarf characteristics. Example, abducting women and children. The solitary woodwife resembles a fay. The solitary male is rather a gigantic or monstrous being. As spirits of the dead often took up their abode in trees, according to older Teutonic belief, there is some connection between them and the woodfolk, as there is between a house spirit, with its seat in the house tree, and the ancestral ghost. In South Tyrol, where the wild folk hang on a traveller's back until he faints, there is an example of wood spirits acting like the Maher, or nightmare. A moosewife also attacked a strong peasant, and so weighed upon him that he sickened and became wretched. The characteristics of really distinct supernatural beings are apt to be ascribed impartially to the different groups. Water. The universal belief in the sacredness of streams, springs, and wells is due to the fact that water, moving, glittering, making audible sounds, is thought to be living and also tenanted by spirits. These spirits were made more and more personal, though still linked to the waters to which they owed their origin. The waters are both beneficent and dangerous. They cleanse, heal, give drink to the thirsty, fertilize, but the sea can take human life on occasion. The rushing, swollen stream, the cataract, the tempestuous sea. The sacred fountain was often near a sacred tree, as at Uppsala. Such fountains gave oracles and healed the sick when the due ritual was observed. In Christian times, resort to wells and springs in the old pagan manner was forbidden, though often the guardianship of these was transferred to a saint, who now performed miracles by its means. In Scandinavia, there are occasional references to the cult of water. Example, the worship of a cataract by Thorstein in Iceland, who sacrificed and carried all leavings of food to it. He was a seer and predicted how many of his sheep would perish in winter. One autumn he said, "Kill what ye will, for I am now fey," or the sheep are, or perhaps both. That night he died, and all the sheep rushed into the cataract and perished. Sometimes human victims were sacrificed to the waters or to the spirits dwelling in them, as when the Franks in 539 AD threw the women and children of the gods into the river Po as an offering and in order to know the future. Before beginning a long voyage, Scandinavian sailors offered a human victim to protect them against the rapacity of Ran. The Normans also offered victims to the sea god before setting out on their raids. The human sacrifices to the Frisian deity Fosite, after violation of a sacred spring, were offered on the seashore, and if Mog is right, they had originally been offered to a sea demon, in accordance with a long-continued Frisian belief that the sea demanded the sacrifice of those guilty of robbery. Human victims were thrown into the sacred waters at Uppsala. Less sinister offerings were also made to springs and wells, and survivals of these in Christian times were denounced in canons of synods and in penitentials. The varied extents of the waters, the broad and deep ocean, the lake, the mere, the river, now larger, now smaller, no less than their varied appearance, terrible or attractive, helped to give form and character to the beings associated with them. Many of these were dangerous, some because of their spacious beauty. Death and danger lurked in the depths of lakes or swollen rivers, but were not unknown to the limpid, sparkling stream or the clear pool, in which dwelt beautiful water elfins. These, like other spirits, were regarded by ecclesiastical writers as demons, and stories told how their wailing or spiteful cries were heard when they realized that a new faith was ousting their supremacy. The more monstrous water spirits were like the giant Hati's wife, who, whether a sea demon or not, tried to wreck the ships of Helgi and Atli, as a monstrous daughter, Hrimgerd, confessed. These are types of the Hafgjör and Mörgjör, sea giantesses, of Old Norse literature. The Anglo-Saxon poem Beowulf gives vivid pictures of the terrible beings who haunted inland waters or marshes. The mother of Grendel, seen on moors, fens, and fastnesses, dwelt in a mere surrounded by gloomy trees and rocks. She is called Merwif, Brimwulf, and Grundvurgen. The mere was of unknown depth. Its waves mounted murkily to the clouds. Fire was seen on its surface by night. There too, sea snakes, dragons, and nirkas were seen, those that, in early morning, often procure disastrous going on the sea road. The Nikeras, like the Nichus, feminine Nichesa, seem to have betokened actual sea monsters, but the words also included water spirits. The different forms of the word are Nikor, plural, Niceras, Middle English, Nukur, meaning also siren, Nikeren that habit bodies of Wifmen and tell of Nisse. Nikker, Norse and Danish, knock, Swedish, knock, German, nix, English, nix, nixie. The widespread use of the word is significant of a common belief. Other words denoted the water spirit. Example, the German Wassermann, or a local form, Hackemann, who sees children with a hook. The older Wasserhold, Wasserjungfrau, Wasserfräulein, Seejungfer, Seeweibel. The Danish Havfolk, Havmind, Havfru. The Swedish Stromkarl and Vattenelföver, or water elves. The Havsman and Havsfru. The Norse Grim or Fossegrim. The Norse knock is also known as Seitrold or Victrold. Medieval literature knows the Mermin, Mervip, Mervif, Merfrau, female supernatural beings of the sea and waters. The Mermenil, or the present-day Merbendil, is mentioned in the sagas. The Landnama book tells how Grim pulled up a Mermenil and demanded to know the future from him, or he would never see his home again. He prophesied Grim's death and other matters which came true. The male water spirit is usually old, like a dwarf, with green hat and teeth, or evergreen hair and eyes, though he may appear as a golden-haired boy, as a kind of centaur, in Iceland and Sweden, as a horse, or in full or half-fish form. He is to be recognized by his slit ears and by his feet, which he keeps hidden. Although his dwarf aspect does not appear prominently in older tradition, the dwarf Andvari in Raginsmal took the form of a fish and dwelt in the water. All water elephants love music, and the Nok sits or dances on the water, playing enchanting music on his golden harp. The Stromkarl sleigh has 11 variations, the 11th belonging peculiarly to him, and if a mortal plays it, every person and thing must dance. If a black lamb was sacrificed to him, the offerer's head being averted, he taught him this music, as did also the Fosgrim to the person who offered a white he-goat on a Thursday evening. If it was lean, the pupil got no further than tuning its fiddle. If fat, the Fosgrim guided his hand, grasping it till the blood came, and now he could play so that trees danced and waterfalls stood still. The Nok assumed youthful form to entice girls. The Swedish Nok has a passion for women in childbed, and takes the husband's form, though his equine hoofs remain. If the woman does not perceive these and admits him into her bed, she becomes demented. The Icelandic Nukur, as a grey horse, tempts someone to mount him, and then dashes into the water, a trait of other water spirits. The Nix and his kind were cruel, and even water maidens staying too long ashore at a dance, or other water spirits intruding on his domain, were slain by him. The drowned were his victims, one or more yearly, and here may be seen a relic of human sacrifice to the waters. The Nix also slew and ate children born to him by his captive human wife. Like other elephants, the waterman knows where treasure is hid, and will communicate the secret to favored mortals. Other elfin traits are seen in the communities of Nixon or of each Nix and his family in their gorgeous palaces under the water, or in an Icelandic story of water elves who entered a house every Christmas Eve to hold revel, some of their number watching for dawn. Each time they killed the servant, left alone in the house. But one Christmas Eve the servant concealed himself, and long before dawn struck the planks of the house and cried, "The dawn! The dawn!" All fled to the water, leaving costly vessels behind, and some were killed in their haste to escape. The Nix and his kind abduct women as wives, for whom in turn human midwives are required. The midwife is warned by the wife not to eat food or take more than her due share when offered to her, and sometimes valueless articles given to her turn to gold. Young children were stolen by them, and a Wasserkopf, a Nix's child with a large head, or a Weshelbalg, or changeling, was left in place of the stolen child. The female water spirits have many different names in the older literature, and the Norse sea goddess Ran corresponds to these insofar as they are hostile to man and are unpleasing of aspect. But not all are of this kind, though there might be danger to mortals in too close an acquaintance with them. These have more of an elfin character. They are beautiful and sit combing their long locks in the sun, but they may also have a homely appearance, as when they come ashore to market, when they may be recognized by the wet edge of skirt or apron. According as they pay much or little for what they purchase, a dear or a cheap season will follow. Sometimes they are naked, but hung round with moss or sedge. The Nix's exquisite song beguiles unwary youths, who, like Hylas, are drawn into the waters. The drowned are also her victims, and children falling into wells come into her power. In earlier Teutonic belief, the Nixen are hardly distinguishable from the Swan Maidens, and like most of these water beings possess prophetic gifts. Hence they are also called Visjuvip. The Nibelung Gengliad tells how Hagen heard water splashing on the Danube, where certain Visjuvip or Mervif were bathing. They would have fled, but he seized their garments, and they floated before him like water hens. On his restoring their garments, they foretold what would befall the Nibelungs. These female water beings sometimes marry men, but their husbands must not see them naked or inquire into their origin, common forms of taboo in such supernatural marriages. As the Swan Maiden was powerless without her wings, so the Nixe, who comes ashore to dance, is grieved if a partner retains her gloves. And in one story, several of them return sorrowfully to the water, which was seen to be reddened by blood, because their father had slain them. Youths in love with Nixon have followed them to their home, like one who descended with an Elbjungfer into the water at Magdeburg, but was slain by her relations. In a variant, she herself was the victim, and her lover, standing by the water, saw it reddened with her blood. The Nixen have flocks and herds which come ashore, and mingling with ordinary animals, render them prolific. The attraction of the woods has been well expressed by Emerson and Meredith, and men still delight in their mystery, their silence, and their voices. They were more dreadful when peopled with supernatural beings, akin to the evil forest spirits of savages, in their obscured haunts of inmost bowers. In bygone ages, vast forests stretched across large parts of Europe, and wide morasses occupied land now under cultivation. From these, strange sounds were heard, or by night the will-o'-the-wisp flitted eerily over them. On wide moorlands, moss-covered boulders protruded from the heath, or grey stones, with a suggestion of shadowy forms lurking among them, stood singly or in circles, or moss-grown tumuli dotted its surface. Such was the region encircling small reclaimed areas, and we do not wonder that men peopled it with the objects of their imagination or their fear: demons, spirits, divinities of wood, stream, immemorial rocks, and fells, and with ghosts of those who lay under the hose of the silent vanished races. Some were monstrous, some beautiful, but all were more or less dangerous. In the forest men worshipped the gods, for the earlier temples were often groves, not to be approached lightly. The men of the township would go in procession to a sacred well, to a hoary tree in which an image was set, to rocks or boulders in which dwelt a spirit, or to the circle or tumulus to invoke the dead. They lit fires or placed candles by tree, stone, or well, or by the crossways, and offered sacrifices there. Even after the Germanic people became Christian, these beliefs in the lesser supernatural beings and these customs continued. Through long centuries, the Church continued to condemn them, but they were too deeply rooted to be easily displaced. Thus, the Council of Tours, in 567 AD, denounced the pagan observances at sacred trees or springs or stones, called places of the pagans, and some years later the Council of Auxerre speaks of vows offered at these instead of in churches. These and similar decrees concerned the Frankish population. Eligius, Bishop of Noyon, who labored among the Frisians, denounced the veneration of stones, wells, trees called sacred, bringing lights to these or offering vows at them or in sacred enclosures, or cancelli, or at crossroads. The 8th century Homilia de Sacrilegiis shows that Frankish Christians were still resorting to the old altars, groves, trees, and rocks to offer animal or other sacrifices and to celebrate feasts, or to pray at springs or rivulets. There was an observance of Neptunalia in Mare, perhaps some feast of a water god or water spirit. Saint Boniface counted as capital sins among the Germans to whom he taught Christianity, offerings at stones or to springs and trees. In Charlemagne's time, as his Admonitio Generalis shows, the cult at trees, fountains, and stones still continued, with the placing of lights at these and other customs. Such practices were forbidden, and these sacred things were to be destroyed. Among the Saxons, who were still pagan, the use of votive offerings at fountains, trees, and groves was punishable by fines varying according to a man's quality. Sacrifices at fountains are mentioned in the Indiculus Superstitionum. How difficult it was to root out these customs and beliefs is seen in the fact that the penitential of the 10th century corrector in Burchard's collection of decrees still inquires, "Hast thou gone to any place other than the church to pray? To fountains, stones, trees, or crossroads, and there burned a candle or torch in reverence to such a place, or offered or eaten there bread or any such oblation, or sought there the welfare of body or soul?" Such superstitions remained popular in spite of all prohibitions and continued long after the time here spoken of, not only among the common people but among those of higher rank. Few indeed of the superstitious customs and beliefs of the Middle Ages cannot be traced to the earlier centuries when pagans began to flock into the church in large numbers without clearly understanding the new religion and without having abandoned either their pagan ways of looking at things or many of their customs. But the rites and beliefs to which they adhered were rooted in a far distant past, and had been dear to the folk for long generations. The springs and wells and rocks had been sacred from prehistoric times, and, in the thought of the different religions, were inhabited by divinities or spirits. Hence the old sacred wells were still visited, as well as sacred stones and trees, in the hope of gaining a boon, healing, fruitfulness, prosperity, from them or from the spirits, mainly now of an elfin kind, supposed to dwell in them. A small offering was made, or a candle lit, to propitiate the genus Loki. The old sacred place, familiar for generations and visited in a hopeful mood, seemed friendly and easily propitiated. Men thought, wrongly no doubt, that it was nearer to their lives than the church's sacred persons, though the Virgin and the saints were beginning to assume a familiar form and to be invoked about the minor ills and blessings of life as well as about things which loomed more largely and terribly on the human horizon. Those who persisted in such practices were excommunicated or subjected to penance, lighter or heavier, or to a fine. They had been deceived by the demons inhabiting these sacred spots, and the rites were execrable in the sight of God. Chapter 19. Animals. Certain monstrous or giant animals play a part in Eddic mythology. The Fenris wolf, the Midgard serpent, the eagle of the winds. Some animals seem to have received a cult, according to statements in the sagas, but this was rendered by individuals, like Brand to Freyfaxi. The saga of Olaf Tryggvason tells of Ogvald, who was a great sacrificer to a certain cow. He took her with him wherever he went, and thought that his health benefited by her milk, and when she died, she was buried in a tumulus near his own. The Landnama book recounts how the Viking Floki set out to seek the snowland. He made ready a great sacrifice, and hallowed 3 ravens to tell him the way. Animal forms entered into the art of the Norsemen, and of these, the dragon or snake is prominent. It appeared on the bows of Norse galleys and was borne into battle as a standard by different Germanic tribes. On swords the snake was engraved, like that one of which the Valkyrie told Helgi. On the edge lies a blood-stained serpent. On the back a serpent's tail is twisted. The snake was supposed to run from the hilt to the point and back again. Snakes or dragons also ornamented helmets, adding strength to them as to the sword. Whether this implies a cult is uncertain, but the life of Saint Barbetus shows that the Lombards worshipped the golden image of a viper. Having come into possession of the saint, it was melted down and made into a chalice and paten. The dragon or serpent occurs often in Norse stories. Example, that of Fafnir, whether as a guardian of treasure or in other aspects. Serpents often appear in tales of the other world and in the Eddic description of Nastrand. Nidhogg and many serpents dwell in Vergelmir and gnaw the roots of Yggdrasil. 2 of these, Ofnir and Swafnir, bear names by which Odin calls himself in Grimnismal, and we know that Odin took snake form occasionally. A design on a helmet from a Swedish grave in which Odin figures shows an upreared serpent before him. The snakes of the other world have been regarded as forms of the souls of the dead, and Odin as god of the dead might sometimes have been regarded as a serpent. Some foundation for this may be seen in many stories, though these are not peculiar to the Teutons, of snakes in meadows and houses feeding out of the children's milk bowl, coming beside them, watching over them, and revealing treasure to them. It is unlucky to kill such snakes. Folk belief also tells of 2 snakes attached to a house, revealing themselves when the master and mistress die, and then themselves dying. Such snakes are soul animals, forms taken by dead ancestors. The soul as a snake is illustrated by a story recorded of King Guthrum of Burgundy by Paulus Diaconus. The king was sleeping in a forest after hunting, when a snake crept out of his mouth and crossed a rivulet by means of the sword of one of his nobles. It now passed into a mountain, soon afterwards returning and entering the king's mouth. When he woke, the king told how he dreamed that he had crossed a river and entered a mountain full of gold. This gold was now sought and found. The soul takes the form of other animals, as will be seen in considering the Fylgja. The stories of Balder and Hotherus, of Fafnir's heart, eaten by Sigurd and others, show that the serpent was regarded as an animal which gave health, strength, and wisdom. The beliefs concerning serpents point to two aspects of these reptiles, beneficent and malignant, though this is far from being peculiar to the Teutons. Animals are also associated with the gods, ravens and wolves with Odin, the boar and the cat with Freya, the horse and the boar with Frey, goats with Thor. Whether this denoted an earlier cult of these animals, as in other religions where an animal is connected with a deity, cannot be verified now. The boar may have been regarded as an embodiment of a fertility spirit, and so associated with Frey, a god of fertility. It is possibly significant that in the Eddic poems and tales, animals are frequently found, apart from the special animals of the gods. Example, in the account of Balder's funeral, in Skirnismal, in Yndluljod, in the Volsung poems, pike, otter, talking birds, a dragon. Equally significant is the prominence given to metamorphosis or animal disguise. Fafnir as a dragon, Andvari as a pike, Ottar as a boar, Odin as a snake, Snoki in different animal forms. These indicate primitive traits in the poems and point to their origin among the folk themselves, rather than among the more cultured classes. (20) The Alfar, or Elves. Along with the Aesir and Vanir, the Eddas speak of the Alfar, or Elves. These are represented in later Teutonic folk belief, and equivalents of the name are Alp, Alb, Eilf, Elv, or Alf. In Germany, the older use of Alp and Alb, in the sense of spirit, genius, fairy, ghostly being, shows that beings like the Norse Alfar were known there also, as does the word elbish, in the sense of mental unsoundness caused by such beings. The word Alp does not occur by itself before the 13th century, but it is found in proper and compound names. The plural forms, probably denoting friendly spirits, are found in poetry. Gradually, however, Alp was used rather in the sense of nightmare, and the words dwerg, zwerg, dwarf, wicht, 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 and their synonyms took its place. The modern German Elfe was derived from English literary sources in the 18th century. Whether the word Alfar is connected etymologically with Sanskrit Rupus is uncertain. The enigmatic Rupus, whose name is variously explained as dexterous and shining, were seasonal divinities and skillful artificers with magical power, 3 in number. They have been regarded as in origin no more than elves who gradually won higher rank. The Eddic Alfar are the earliest known elves, akin to the Anglo-Saxon Ylfi, singular Aelf. The scanty notices of them show that they had a loftier nature than the elves of later beliefs. They are not said to be dangerous or mischievous, nor are they yet confused with evil trolls through Christian enmity to the old paganism. They are joined with the Aesir, as in the recurrent phrase Aesir ok Alfar, used partly but not wholly for the sake of alliteration, and also with both Aesir and Vanir. In the prose introduction to Lokasenna, many Aesir and Alfar are said to have been present at Aegir's banquet, and Eldir said to Loki, "None of the Aesir and Alfar here present has a good word for thee." Loki says that Bragi is the most cowardly of all the Aesir and Alfar present, and he accuses Freya of misconduct with every one of these. In Voluspa and Trunksvita, the question is asked, "How is it with the Aesir? How is it with the Alfar?" And the latter poem gives the reply, "Ill is it with the Aesir, ill is it with the Alfar." In Havamal, Odin says, "I know all the Aesir, I know all the Alfar." And in the next verse we learn that Thjodrorir sang, "Strength to the Aesir and prosperity to the Alfar." The same poem speaks of Odin carving runes for the Aesir and Dian carving them for the Alfar. In Skirnismal, Frey complains that none of the Aesir or Alfar is willing that he and Gerd should come together. Odin, in Grimnismal, speaks of the land lying near the Aesir and Alfar as holy. Aesir, Alfar, and Dwalin's people, or dwarves, are conjoined in Fafnismal as progenitors of the Norns. In Skirnismal, Gerd asks Skirnir, "Art thou of the Alfar, or of the Aesir, or of the wise Vanir?" The sacred mead with which the magic runes were sent forth is with the Aesir, the Alfar, the wise Vanir, and with men, says Sigdrifumal. These phrases show that the Alfar are akin to divine beings. They dwell in heaven, in Alfheim, which is ruled by Frey, and they act with gods and share their feasts. A similar combination was known to the Anglo-Saxons, one of their spells coupling Asa and Nulfa. Though their creation is not mentioned, the Alfar are a distinct group, supernatural and with super qualities. Unlike the dwarves, no individual elf is spoken of, save Daen in Havamal, the name also of a dwarf in other poems. Volund, Wayland the Smith, however, is called Prince and Lord of Alfar. Only one kind of Alfar is spoken of in the poems, but Snorri gives three groups: Ljósalfar, or light elves, Dökkalfar, or dark elves, and the inhabitants of Svartalfaheim, the Svartalfar, or black elves, whom, however, the context shows to be dwarves. Snorri says that Alfheim is the place where the light elves live, but the dark elves dwell down in the earth, unlike the others in appearance, but more so in nature. The light elves are fairer than the sun, but the dark elves are blacker, or Svartari, than pitch. These dark elves are not again mentioned, but Snorri relates how Loki swore to get the black elves to make for Sif hair of gold. And then he went to those dwarves called Ivaldi's sons, who made it. Odin sent Loki into Svartalfaheim to the dwarf Andvari in order to get his treasure. He also sent Skirnir into Svartalfaheim to certain dwarves who made the fetter Gleipnir. The black elves were thus dwarves, and as dark elves dwell in the earth, they are presumably identical with these. In spite of Snorri's distinction, there was perhaps but one class of Alfar, since no others are named in the Eddic poems, in old writers, or in folk tales, even if the elves of later belief are a sort of middle being between light and dark elves. Snorri further states that at the southern end of heaven there are two other heavens superimposed, and in the uppermost is believed to be the hall Gimli, reserved for the righteous, but at present inhabited by the light elves. There may be here a reflection of Christian ideas of successive heavens, and possibly an identification of light elves with angels. Alfheim, the region of the light elves, is a heavenly abode, and in Alvismal, heaven is called Fair Roof, by the Alfar, as if it stretched over their aerial home, and the sun is its fair wheel. Unfortunately, the Eddas say nothing regarding the functions of the Alfar. Light, as applied to them, has no moral significance, and merely refers to their appearance. Certain elfin groups of later Scandinavian belief, associated with the air and the trees, and not specifically an underground race, may represent the older light elves, though neither they nor those of German tradition dwell in heaven. Grimm connected with the light elves the Teutonic white women, appearing at noon, sitting in the sunshine or bathing, contrary to the avoidance of sunlight by most fairy folk. This trait of the white women recalls the Eddic name for the sun, Alfrodul, or shining of the elves, elf ray, elf light, perhaps because they rejoiced in it. But it might equally mean that it was a danger to them, and in Hamthesmal, dawn is called the grief of Alfar. In later folk belief, the elfin beings who most probably represent the earlier Alfar are generally a race dwelling on the earth or under the earth, yet distinct from dwarves, though these have many elfin traits. Other groups of beings haunting the forests, the waters, the mountains are also akin to elves. These also were objects of belief in earlier times, and survivals of cult paid to them were frequently condemned in the earlier Middle Ages and even later. Whether the Anglo-Saxon glosses would speak of Voodoo elfen, Mund elfen, Dun elfen, Feld elfen, Sei elfen, represent a mere translation of dryads, oreads, naiads, and the like, or actual groups of native elfins, cannot be definitely known. The older German Elben seems to have been merged in the various kinds of dwarves and underground folk known to later tradition. Beautiful, fairy-like women, akin to the medieval fays, are known to German tradition, the white women, or Weisse Frauen, already mentioned. They are seen on hills or in woods, or haunting old castles. Sometimes spellbound in hills, they guard treasure. They carry flowers or a bunch of keys, or are seen turning over pods of flax. If a mortal takes such flowers or pods, they turn to gold. The white woman tries to induce a mortal to do something which will release her from enchantment, but usually the purpose fails. Some of these white women are ancestral spirits. More usually, they represent older native goddesses or nature spirits, and the spell under which they suffer may be a symbol of the ban laid by Christianity on the divinities of the older faith. Like water elfins, they are seen basking in the sun, combing their tresses, or washing in a brook. In Iceland, the Alfar, or elves, preserve the conception of the Eddic Alfar and resemble fairies, though the word has now the equivalence of the German Zwerge and Norse Oneirjordisk. Like the Ljosalfar, they do not fear the light, but appear in the sunshine. The name Huldefolk, or hidden folk, is thought to be preferred by them as a milder term than Alfar, and they are also called Lioflinger, or darlings, an obvious euphemism such as is often applied to supernatural beings. Their dwellings are in hills, stones, and rocks, or even in the sea, and they seem to have ousted the Dwergar, now unknown to folk belief. Another class of beings, the trolls, are more monstrous than elfin, giants, fiends, demons, as in the Eddas and Sagas, yet they possess certain elfin characteristics. Though the elves are little known in Norway, there are different classes of beings who have elfin traits. The troll folk, or tusser, trolls, gnomes, or sprites, may be as large as men, and they possess houses, cattle, and churches. Music is heard from their abodes in the mountains, whither they often carry mortal maidens. Huldra, from Athulya, or to hide or to cover. A mountain fairy or wood nymph, already mentioned in the 13th century, appears as a beautiful woman among the hills, clad in blue or grey, but she possesses a tail or is hollow behind. Her melancholy song causes sadness. Others describe it as fascinating. Forms of dancing, she appears at merrymakings, and once, when a partner, espying her tail, but not wishing to betray her, said, "Fair maid, you will lose your garter," she vanished, afterwards rewarding him with gifts and cattle, of which she has a special brand. When a man marries a Huldra, the result is not always happiness. Huldra may be regarded as queen of the green-clad Huldra folk, or fairies, who dwell in mounds, where their mournful music, the Huldra slat, is heard, and into which they invite men. The Huldra man sings to obtain a human wife, and a youth who discovered one with his sweetheart fired a silver bullet at him, seized her, and rode off, pursued by the Huldra folk. The subterranean folk, who are at enmity with the Huldra folk, bade him ride on the rough and not on the smooth, as they saw him approaching his house. He rode through a rye field and escaped his pursuers, but they afterwards burned his house. The subterranean folk, or elves, described in some parts of Norway as diminutive naked boys wearing hats, live in mounds and by lofty trees. They love music and dancing, and are described as mischievous. The dwarves live under the earth, and are reputed to be long-armed and skillful. The Vaiter are tutelary spirits dwelling in Vaitehugar, or mounds, at which offerings are laid, or in waterfalls, but they are sometimes described as trolls or nisse, the house spirits, like boys dressed in grey with black hats. Danish legend connects the elfin race with the rebel angels, who, when cast out of heaven, fell into mounds or barrows, the troll folk, bjerg trolls, or bjerg folk, or into the moose, the elver folk or elle folk. These troll folk differ from the Icelandic trolls and resemble the dwarves. Their mounds, which contain treasure, may be seen raised on red pillars on St. John's Eve, but they also dwell under human habitations, coming up into these through a hole. They wear dark clothing and are described as like boys in size, or, as in Jutland, 4 feet high, with clumsy heads, red hair, and a red cap. They love dancing and are friendly to men, but old ballads tell of their stealing maidens and of the seductive power of their females over men. The Elle folk, whom legend describes as Adam's children by Lilith, and is called Elle because of the double L in her name, lives in mounds on the moors, or in alder or Elle trees. The males, who resemble old men, are seen basking in the sunbeams, like the Josalfar, and entice maidens to join them. The females, who are beautiful but hollow as a dough trough behind, are seen dancing in the Elle dance by moonlight. Their ravishing music, often irresistible to susceptible youth, has fatal results. Their cattle feed on dew, and the cattle of men suffer by mingling with them, or by feeding where the Elle folk have danced. Much of the lore about the Elle folk and the trolls is similar. Their dances, the pillar mounds, and their kindly or hostile relations to men. The Danish Vetter have similar traits, but are on the whole regarded as evil, since they suck the breasts of children. In Sweden, the same likeness in the traits of beings with different names exists. The Yedic Alfar survive in the Alvor, or hogfolk, who dwell in mounds or hills. They are more slender and refined than mortals, and are ruled by a king and queen, whose kingdom and laws resemble those of men. Many tales and ballads describe the beauty and musical voices of the females, their dancing in woods, hillsides, and meadows, where the grass in the circle grows more luxuriantly than outside it. Into the circle mortals are enticed. The dancers must disappear by crow-crow, otherwise they remain stationary but invisible. And if anyone touches them unawares, sickness and pain follow. Fever is caused by meeting with these elves. Should a man place his ear to an elf mound, he hears the music, and if he promises them redemption, it becomes sweeter, but changes to lamentation if it does not. Offerings for the sick used to be laid in round hollows cut out of rocks or stones, prehistoric rock carvings. The older Alfar are mentioned on a runic stone at Lagna, which depicts one seizing two serpents. The Ra is a harmless elfin, heard in workshops and houses, but silent whenever anyone seeks the cause of the noise. The sound of his working is a good omen, but if he is heard lamenting, this betokens an accident. The Ra resembles, but is distinct from, the Vattar, guardians of houses beneath which they live, playing with the children, or feasting when the household sleeps. They are unknown in a house tenanted by a Nisse or Brownie. The older literature mentions the Lofjerskskor, perhaps the same as the Lund folk, Grove folk, or Lund Jungfrur, or Grove damsels, invisible spirits of the heathen groves. Groves and trees, especially lime trees, are still associated with the Alf and the Ra. Those who protect such trees or seek the help of these elfins benefit by this, but if anyone breaks a branch, he suffers for it. The origin of the elves and fairies of popular belief, including the older Alfar, has been sought in different directions. They were souls of the dead, nature spirits, lesser divinities, reminiscences of older races, products of dream or imagination. Probably all these mingled together in the elfin belief wherever found. There is, however, some evidence that the Alfar or a certain class of them were, if not originating in, yet connected locally with the dead, perhaps because both dwelt in mounds or tumuli. Olaf Gudrusson, after his death, and while dwelling in his burial mound at Geirstad, was known as Geirstadar Alf. His kinsmen sacrificed to him for a fruitful year. This evidence, however, is too scanty for us to assume that all the dead were called Alfar. The religious or mythic aspect of the older Alfar is seen in the Alfa Blot, and in survivals of sacrifices to elfin beings at trees or stones, and to the house spirit or brownie. But, on the whole, this aspect has vanished and given place to a merely superstitious regard for these beings, who are the subjects of innumerable folk tales. To the Alfar was offered a sacrifice called Alfa Blot, resembling the Disablot made to the Disir. A description of this is given in the Cormac saga. Thorward inquired of Thordis, a wise woman, how his wounds could be cured. She told him that nearby was a hillock in which lived Alfar. He must take a bullock and redden the hillock with its blood. Then he must make a feast to the Alfar with the meat, and he would get well. Here the Alfar in the hillock resembled the dead in their barrows. In the time of Olaf, the inland people of Norway were still heathen or inclined to the old heathen ways. The skald Sigvat was on a journey with his companions to the east. In Gautland, they came to a homestead where, on asking admission, they were told that an Alfa Blot was going on, and they must not come in. The nature of this act of worship is not described. On Helgafell, or Holy Fell, a hill regarded as very sacred by Thorolf, an early emigrant to Iceland, men were forbidden to commit that form of defilement known as Alfreka, or elf driving, obnoxious to the Elfar. Chapter 20. Vættir. The Eddic poems and the sagas speak of a class of spirits called Vættir, singular Vætr. Parallels to the Norse word occur widely in the Germanic region. Wicht, applied to spirits and men, like the English wight, which may mean a person as well as a spirit. Wichtel, Wichthelem, Elbe, Lemures, Laris cum corporibus morantes, vel nocturni daemones. Later dialect forms are Wichtlein, Wichtelmann, diminutive beings of a fairy or dwarf kind, of whom many stories are told. The Wicht had the generic meaning of creature, or sometimes a demoniac being or devilkin. The word Vættir may be regarded as covering any divine or semi-divine spirits, but it is applied to a class of spirits of a tutelary kind, guardians of the land or of parts of it, and related to the land much as the Fjölgja was to a person. Such spirits were called Landvættir, not easily distinguished from the Elfar, and they may have included, if they are not ultimately derived from, the spirits of the dead. In the Gulathing's law, the king and bishop are ordered to inquire whether men believe in Landvættir who dwell in tumuli and cataracts. There is no clear evidence of a cult of the Vættir. We shall first pass in review the Eddic references to Vættir. In Helga Kvita Jorvardssonar, Helgi asks Rimgerd whether one Vættir or many invaded the ships, and she replies that there were 3 bands of 9. These are Valkyries, and the name is thus applied to them. Of Agner it is said in Sigurd Dryfumal that he found no Vættir to shield him. In Odrunar Gatr, the Holler Vættir, good or friendly Vættir, are appealed to for aid, and along with them Frigg, Freya, and favouring gods, as if they were included among the Vanir. The word is occasionally used, with or without a qualifying adjective, in the sense of a miserable being. Brunhild is called a miserable Vættir, and Golrond is described by Gudrun as a Vættir, in the sense of a witch. Thor addressed Loki as wretched Vættir. These, however, are secondary uses of the word, which has the more general sense of friendly spirits in the other passages. The Vættir occupied the land unseen, except by the second-sighted, and they had to be treated properly, lest they should leave a district which would suffer in consequence. For this reason, men would avoid a district known to be haunted by them, though a bold person would take such land where none had dared to settle, like Olvar, who occupied land at Grimms River in Iceland. This unwillingness to injure their susceptibilities explains the curious heathen law of circa 930 AD, known as Ulfleot's law, which announces that men must not approach land with a figurehead on their ship. It must be taken off, so that the land would not be approached with gaping heads and yawning jaws, which would frighten the Landvættir. The Norse ships had fearsome decorations for figureheads, grim gaping heads of ships, as a poem by Hornclough in the Heimskringla describes them. King Harald Gormson of Denmark bid a wizard Finn take a skin-changing journey to Iceland in order to see what tidings of it he might obtain, the king having hostile ends in view. The Finn took the form of a whale, but when he approached Iceland, he found its hills and fells full of Landvættir, both small and great. At 4 successive places he was hindered from landing. At Vapria Fjord by a dragon, followed by worms, frogs, and adders blowing venom at him. At Breda Fjord by a great bull which waded out and bellowed at him, accompanied by many landvættir. At a third place by a mountain giant with many other giants, and at Eyjafjord by a great fowl with many others. These all appear to be the guardian spirits of the 4 chief families of Iceland, dwelling in these 4 places. Hence, there may not be a clear distinction between the Vættir and the Fjölgja, or they are here acting in combination. As in other examples, they have the form of animals or giants. A woman with second sight saw all the landvættir following Björn in the southwest of Iceland to a moot, and his brother to fishing and fowling. Björn dreamt that a bergbui, or giant, asked him to be his partner. He agreed, and now his talk was increased, because a buck came to his she-goats. Grettir met a huge man called Hallmund, who was wounded, and said that he would help him for the aid which Hallmund had formerly given him. Hallmund took him to his cave, where his huge daughter cured the wounds of both. Friendship was sealed between them, and Hallmund gave Grettir counsel. Hallmund was a landvættir, and like many of these, interested in the welfare of men. By magical means, the landvættir might be compelled to do a man's bidding. Egil Skallagrimsson was incensed against King Eirik and his queen Gunhild. He was leaving Norway for Iceland, but first landed on an island near the coast, taking with him a hazel pole. Setting on this a horse's head, he fixed it on a rock looking towards Norway. Then uttering a curse formula, he said, "I erect this insulting post, or nith post, and turn it against Eirik and Gunhild." Turning it towards the land, he added, "I turn this insulting pole against the landvættir of this land, that they go astray, and not one of them light on his dwelling, till they drive Eirik and Gunhild out of the land." On the pole, runes embodying the curse were written. The horse's head on the post had the effect of the gaping heads of the ship already referred to, and the curse illustrates the old runic magic. Although the Vættirs were beneficent, this story shows how they might become harmful. There were certain spirits of the Vættir kind regarded as harmful. Uvættir, like the German unhold. They might hinder the land from being appropriated by settlers. They did harm to men by disease or sickness, but it was possible for these to be healed by those who had such a gift. In Odin's raven song, treacherous Vættir are said to have confounded the runes. With the coming of Christianity, all spirits such as the Vættir were regarded as evil. Tradition held that they had now deserted the regions once guarded by them. Just before Christianity came to Iceland, the seer Thorhall was in bed looking through the window of his room, when his host, Siduhall, who had accepted Christianity, observed him smiling. "Why do you smile?" he asked. Thorhall replied, "I see many mounds opening, and all spirits, small and great, are packing their gear and making ready to depart." This is an early example of a story, of which there are many variants in Germany, of the Wichtel manner leaving the country in a body, for one reason or another. In Christian custom, however, means were used to expel all such spirits, and one of these is found in the processions at Ascension Tide, and at other times through the fields with the sprinkling of holy water and the saying of prayers directed against them. In spite of this, the Vættir are remembered in one form or another. In Norway they are still looked upon as tutelary spirits, dwelling in Vættihaugar, mounds at which offerings used to be laid, in trees too sacred to be touched, or in waterfalls, though they are also called trolls or nisser. In some districts they differ but little from the Huldre folk. The Danish Vættir have traits similar to those of Elle folk and trolls, but are on the whole regarded as evil. The Swedish Vatter are elfin in character, guardians of houses beneath which they live, playing with the children, the females even suckling a weakly child. When the household sleeps, they feast, but they're unknown in a house tenanted by a Nisse or Brownie. They ask help of women for their females in childbirth, rewarding them well. The Faroe Islanders also believe in Vaitrar, which dwell in houses, where milk is placed for them. They are small and handsome, and give prosperity to a house, but leave it if a newcomer is unkind. Chapter 22. The Fulgia. In the Fulgia, we meet with an interesting Norse conception, though one not peculiar to that region. The belief may be traced to the idea that the soul or one of the souls, which, in primitive belief, a man is supposed to possess, could leave the body and become visible to its owner or another person, either as a double of the man or as an animal. It was seen in dreams and in waking life. Such a soul tended to become a separate entity, connected, however, with its owner, and mainly appearing before his death. So it was with the Norse Fulgia, or follower. The Fulgia was a kind of guardian spirit, most usually in the form of an animal. But in one of two examples of a Fulgia in the poetic Edda, that of Helgi appeared to his brother Hethin as a troll wife, riding a wolf bridled by snakes. He refused her advances, and she threatened vengeance upon him at the king's toast that night during the Yule feast. At this toast, Hethin vowed that he would have Swava, the beloved of Helgi. Then grief seized him, and he fled until he found Helgi and told him of his vow. Helgi bade him not to grieve, for he was about to fight a duel and feared he would not return. Hethin now knew that he had seen Helgi's Fulgia, or, as the poem puts it, his Fulgur, plural, as if he had more than one. The other reference is in Atlamal. An eagle was seen flying through the hall by Kostbera, who interpreted it as the hammer of Atli, betokening an evil fate, for with blood it sprinkled those present. Hammer is literally skin, or covering, but here perhaps signifies Fulgia, Atli's soul in an animal covering. The animal Fulgia often had some corresponding aspect to that of the character of its owner. Bulls and bears attended great chiefs, foxes people of crafty nature. In the Njal saga, Hauskuld saw a dream, a huge bear going out of the house with two cubs, and entering another house. He knew that its match was not to be found, and so regarded it as the Fulgia of the peerless Gunnar. Einar dreamed that he saw a huge ox going to the farm of his powerful brother Gudmund. At the high seat, it fell dead. From this he was able to foretell his brother's death. The boy Thorstein, Oxfoot, rushed into a room where an old man called Gate was sitting and fell on the floor. Gate laughed because, as he explained to the boy, "I saw what thou couldst not see, a white bear cub over which Thorstein had fallen, his Fulgia in that form." A bear which fought by the side of Rolf Kraki was regarded as the Fulgia of Bjarki, one of his heroes, who was meanwhile asleep. When Bjarki himself appeared on the battlefield, the bear vanished. Eyjolf slew his enemy, but was himself lamed by a fall from his horse. He was told by a seer that the Fulgur of his enemy's kinsfolk has caused this, whereupon he indignantly asked if they were stronger than those of himself and his friends. An Icelander dreamed that a pack of wolves fell on him and his followers. 2 of them were killed by him. A seer, who explained the dream, said that the wolves were mannahugir, or men spirits, hostile to him. At the fight which followed close upon this dream, the Icelander slew 2 of his foes. Mannahugir is thus an alternative name for Fjölgr. Thjord saw a goat wallowing in its gore and told Njal of this. Njal could not see the goat, and said that Thord must be fey, as he had seen his Fjölgr. Next day he was slain. A man who was near death, or who was fey, was apt to see his own Fjölgr. Dreaming of attacking animals also foreshadowed a fight with the men whose Fjölgr they were. A man's Fjölgr protected him, but its death was followed by that of its owner. Though whether this means that the Fjölgr never survived its owner's death is doubtful. The Fjölgr Kona, or following woman, always had woman's form and was even more definitely a guardian spirit than the animal Fjölgr. She might be guardian of an individual or of a family, and there might be more than one of them, 3, 9, or a multitude. The name Hamingr was also applied to them. Hamingr, singular, is from hammer, which meant a caul, as well as skin or covering. And as the caul was supposed to bring good luck to the child born with it, so the word Hamingr, as applied to fortune-bringing guardian spirits showing themselves in a certain form, came to be used in the abstract sense of happiness or good luck. These guardian spirits accompanied men, shielded, warned, consoled, and cheered them. They appeared to their proteges, urging them to action. When one member of a family died, his Fjölgr would pass from him to another kinsman. In Vigga Glum's saga, Glum dreamed that a huge helmeted woman, whose shoulders touched the mountains, came up from the sea. He asked her to come into his house. On awaking, he explained the dream as meaning that his mother's father, Vigfus, must be dead. This woman was his Hamingr, for he had been held high in honor. She must be seeking to take up her abode with Glum. Soon after came news of the death of Vigfus. This helmeted woman resembles a Valkyrie. Other examples of family guardian spirits, called Oetterfylgja or Kynfylgja, occur in the sagas. As the skald Halfred lay dying on board ship, he saw a huge woman wearing a byrnie going over the waves, his guardian spirit, whom he knew now would pass from him. She asked his brother to accept her, but he refused, whereupon the skald's son Halfred said that he would take her. And now she vanished. The troll woman, Helgi's Fjölgr, who designed Hethin's company, may have wished to be his guardian after Helgi's death. With the coming of Christianity, the belief in these female guardian spirits was apparently altered. They were divided into white and black groups, the former those of the new faith, the latter those of heathenism. This is illustrated in the saga of Olaf Tryggvason. Thridrandi, son of Hall, heard a knocking at the door. Opening it, he saw no one. But going by the woodpile, he heard the noise of people riding into the horse garth from the north. These were 9 women in black with drawn swords. Others were heard coming from the south, 9 women in white. Before he could return to the house, the women in black wounded him. In this condition his friends found him, and before his death he told what he had heard and seen. The seer Thorhall said that the black women were the Fjölgr of Hall and his kinsmen, more properly Hamingr, who followed the old faith, and they had attacked Thidrandi because it was about to be overthrown. These Disir had foreseen this, and they were angry because the usual respect would not be paid to them. The brighter spirits, now about to connect themselves with the family, must have wished to help him, but had not been in time. Here, as in other examples, this Kynfylgja resembles Valkyries, and the name Disir, or goddesses, is applied to them as it was to Valkyries and Norns. In the Gisla saga, Gisli was visited by two dream women, or Dromkonur, one of whom, described by him as a Valkyrie and sent by Odin to speak his will, was evil and foretold evil. She seems to represent the dying paganism. The other was milder, and appeared almost as a Christian guardian angel. Gisli was standing midway between the two fights, pagan and Christian. Once he saw a hall with his kinsfolk. In it were 7 fires, some burning brightly, others were low. The milder dream woman told him to leave the old beliefs and witchcraft, and to be good to the poor and weak. The fires were symbols of his life. Those burning brightly indicated the number of years that he had to live. On one occasion she rode a grey horse, and bade him follow her to her house, where he saw benches with pillows of down. Here, she told him, he would come when he died. The evil dream woman often came to Gisli, wishing to sprinkle blood over him and to bathe him in it, and looking spitefully at him. She appeared more often as his death drew near, saying that she would prevent what the others had foretold from coming to pass. In this story, the belief in Fjölgukonur had been influenced by the Christian conception of good and evil angels, associated with a man's soul, for which they strive. In Njál's saga, Hall, a pagan, would only consent to become a Christian if Saint Michael became his Fjölgu angel, or guardian angel. The resemblance of the Fjölgukona to other kinds of spirits, example Valkyries, is interesting. Valkyries also guarded chosen heroes and came to their aid when called upon. The Fjölgukonur are sometimes called Spadisir, or prophetic women. Such beings as the Fjölga are still known in Iceland, Norway, and Sweden. Their names are as follows. In Iceland, Fulga. In Norway, Folgi, usually an animal, and Vardogor. In Sweden, Valnad or Vard. They are generally good, protective spirits, and care is taken. Example, when a man leaves the house, to allow his protector to leave with him, lest danger meet him, especially from his evil spirits. Sometimes they are warning spirits, telling by knocking or rattling the latch that their owners are coming, or that death or misfortune is at hand. Such a spirit will appear as a double of its owner, even to the person himself, as his double was seen by the hero of Stevenson's Ticonderoga, giving thus a warning of his death. This Highland superstition of the double, used in Ticonderoga with such effect, or, as the Reverend Robert Kirk, Episcopal minister of Aberfoyle in the 17th century, called it in his Secret Commonwealth of the Elves, the co-walker, seen by persons with second sight, resembles that of the Vardogr. Kirk, however, thought that the co-walker was a fairy. Chapter 23. The Norns. Teutonic people seem to have been much impressed by the idea of overruling fate, or, at first, of powers controlling the destinies of men and even gods, and it enters largely into their literature. Fate none can escape is the terse saying of Gudrun in Atlamal. Different words express this conception. The word urpur, weird, or English weird, had the meaning of fate, and a glossed fatum eventus. Worth may be connected with the Indo-Germanic werth, or to turn, with which are linked wirth, wirtel, or spindle. Hence, worth would have the meaning of a fate spun, just as the Norse spun the threads of human fate. In literary sources, that is, example, the poem Heliand, word means the spirit of death or death in the abstract as the fate of man. Word took him away means death took him away. In Beowulf we find Wyrd ravished him away. It shall befall us as Wyrd decideth. Wyrd ordains, or weaves, or deceives, or harms. The weaving of fate, Wyrd gewaweth, occurs in a manuscript and also in Beowulf. The word method, or measure, of fate, the power that metes out or dispenses, is used in Heliand, as in the phrase methodo gescapu, determined by fate. Besides the general use of urpur in the sense of fate, the word occurring in the plural urper, or fates, the Norse people believed in embodiments of fate in one or more supernatural beings, the Norns, the chief of whom was herself called Urd. The name, which still occurs in Faroese lore as Norna, is of uncertain derivation, but some students connect it with Swedish dialect forms Norna, Nyrna, or to tell secretly, to warn, and with Middle English Nirnen, to recite, to utter. It has also been connected with Nornhi, twisting, or combining. There may first have been a number of spirits of fate, with a later, more personalized fate goddess, the Norn Urd. But in Eddic literature there are 3 Norns, and many Norns are also spoken of. Snorri says, "There is a fair hall by the ash under Urd's well, and out of it comes 3 maids, Urd, Verdandi, Skuld. They determine the course of men's lives and are called Norns. Yet there are many Norns, those who come to each child that is born and shape its fate. These are of the race of the gods. The second are of the Alfar. The third are of the dwarf kin." For this statement, Snorri cites Fafnismal. Of different origin are the Norns, not all of one race. Some are the people of the Aesir, some of the people of the Alfar, and some are Dwalin's daughters. At this point, Gangleri interposes. If the Norns determined the fates of men, then they gave unequal portions. Some have a pleasant, luxurious life, others have few possessions or little fame. Some have long life, others short. To this the reply is, good Norns of honorable race appoint good life. Those who suffer evil fortunes are ruled by evil Norns. Snorri also says that the Norns who dwell by Urd's well take water of it every day and sprinkle it over the ash, so that its limbs may not rot or decay. We turn now to the poetic Edda. The decision of the Norns, that is, death, is spoken of in Fafnismal, as if it were lying in wait at the beginning of life's voyage, in youth. The same poem describes the Norns as helpful in need, bringing the babe from the mother. It also says that the Norns have decided that Sigurdrifa, or Brunhild, shall not wake from her magic sleep. At the birth of Helgi, according to Helgi Hundingsbana, it was night in the house when Norns came and shaped his life. He would be most famous of warriors and best of princes. Mightily they wove the threads of fate, the golden threads, and made them fast in the moon's hall, the sky. The ends were hid in the east and west, between which his lands would be, and one of the Norns, here called Neri's kinswoman, cast a chain to the north and bade it ever be firm. This betokened the widespread fame of the hero, especially in the north. In Sigurd Rifumal, Mim's head bade runes to be written on the nails of the Norns, and the same poem describes birth runes as those which give help in childbirth, when the Norns, here called Disir, are asked to aid. Yet the Norns were apt to be regarded as evil, or certain Norns were evilly disposed, as Snorri says. Thus the dwarf Andvari, transformed to a pike, told Loki that an evil Norn in old days doomed him to dwell in the waters. Brunhild said that grim Norns had shaped for her the longing she had for Sigurd. Hostile fates, or Urper, had caused the complex situation arising from Sigurd's having Gudrun as wife, while she herself is Gunnar's. Gudrun says that Norns awakened her with terrible dreams, which she then relates. In another poem, she speaks of the Norns whose wrath she seeks to escape in death, but in vain. Helgi blames the Norns for his slaying Bragi and Hogni. Hamther also speaks of the Norns, here Disir, driving him to slay Erp, and, as he is dying, says that no one outlives the night when the Norns have spoken. Angantyr found his brother dead on the field of battle, and said that he had brought him to death, for evil is the doom of the Norns. In the saga of Harald Fairhair, when Einar saw Halfdan, he sang, "The Norns have ruled it rightly." And in Egil's saga, Kvöldwulf accused the Norns for snatching away his son Thorolf. Odin, as Nikar, warned Sigurd that Talar Disir, evil goddesses, presumably Norns, would be at both his sides, willing that he should receive wounds. Thus death and disaster were due to the decree of the Norns. The Norns have done both good and evil, says a runic inscription on the Timbus church at Borgrund, and their evil aspect may be seen in the name for wolves, hounds of the Norns, and in the myth that the peace and golden age of gods were first forsaken when 3 giant maidens of great might came out of Jotunheim. This is told in Voluspa, and these giant maidens are generally regarded as embodiments of fate, or Norns, mightier than the gods. The same phrase, 3 maidens, or Priyar Meyar, is applied to the maidens in this passage and to the Norns themselves in a later passage. Similarly, 3 hosts of maidens, who come of the giant's kin, according to Vafthrud Nismal, are thought to be Norns, though here kindly of nature. There is no escaping the fate fixed for men by the Norns, as Gudrun found when she sought but could not obtain death as a relief from her ills. So, Svipdag says that no one can tear the decrees of Urd, however undeservedly these are laid upon him. The belief in 3 Norns, one of whom was apt to give an evil destiny, where the others had promised what was good, is illustrated by certain stories. In Nornagest's Thatter, written circa 1300 AD, the stranger Nornagest was persuaded to tell before King Olaf how he came by his name. He said that prophetic women, Volor, Spaknor, traveled through the land, foretelling to men their fates. They were invited into houses, and gifts were given to them. They came to his father's house when Nornagest was in his cradle, 2 candles burning beside him. 2 of them said that he would be greater than any of his kindred or any sons of chiefs in the land. The 3rd and youngest Norn, because the crowd of people present had pushed her off her seat, said that the child would live only as long as the lighted candle beside him burned. The eldest now blew it out, and bade his mother keep it and not relight it. Having heard this, Olaf persuaded Nornagest to be baptized. He had long ago obtained the candle, and now he lit it, saying that he was 300 years old. After his baptism, the candle flickered out and he died. The Norns are regarded in this story more as actual women with prophetic powers than as supernatural. The story, which is the subject of a Faroese ballad, is like the others summarized in this volume, an interesting example of the literary use of the situation created by the coming of Christianity to Scandinavia and the passing of the old paganism. The same literary use of a like situation is found in Irish and Welsh literature. Some scholars have seen in the story of Nornagest an influence from the classical tale of Meleagr and the three Parcei. That story, however, has quite a different ending, and possibly both are variants of an earlier folk tale. The candle with which is bound up the hero's life is a life token, so well known in innumerable stories, and a similar incident occurs in medieval tales as well as in later folk tales. Example, the German Dornröschen or Perrault's La Belle au Bois dormant, where 3, 7, or even 13 fays or spay wives appear at a child's birth, the last one wishing it evil because of a fancied slight, while the others wish it good. Saxo Grammaticus, who calls the Norns Parcei and Nymphae and makes them sisters, says that the ancients consulted their oracles about the destinies of their children. Fridleif sought to find the fate of his son Olaf, and after offering vows, went to the temple of the gods where he saw 3 nymphs sitting on the 3 seats in the Saculum. The first was benignant and bestowed on Olaf beauty and favour in the sight of men. The second gave him the gift of great generosity. The third, mischievous and malignant, wished to mar these gifts and ordained to him niggardliness, which was afterwards always mingled with his generosity. This story suggests a cult of the Norns, but whether we are to understand that their images sat in the Saculum, resembling those of the Celtic Matre, or that the Norns actually appeared, is not clear. Saxo's wood nymphs, who aid Hotherus, have some traits of the Norns, but are more on the whole more akin to Valkyries. So also have the 3 maidens who prepared Baldur's magic food. The eldest maiden, who refused Hotherus a share of this food, is like the evilly disposed Norn. 3 Norns, or 3 chief Norns, are spoken of by Snorri, copying Voluspa, which alone of the Eddic poems names the 3. The ash Yggdrasil grows by Urd's well. Thence come the maidens, great in wisdom, 3 from the hole beneath the tree. Urd one is called, the second Verdandi. On a wooden tablet discord, Skuld the third. Fast they set the lot of life, to the sons of men, the fate of men. Urd is also named in Havamal, where Lodafnir says that he was by Urd's well and heard Har or Odin speak of runes and giving counsel. In Svipdagsmal, Groa chants a rune to Svipdag, by which the bolts of Urd on every side shall guard him on the road that he goes. The names of Skuld and Verdandi do not occur again in the Eddas, save that Skuld is named as a Valkyrie in Voluspa. These names appear to be due to a learned error in the 12th century and interpolated into Voluspa. Urd was taken for the preterite stem of Verpa, to be, and called the Norn of the past. From the same verb came Verdandi, the Norn of the present, and from Skulu, denoting the future tense, came Skuld, the Norn of the future. Some influence from the conception of the Greek moirai, denoted as past, present, and future in Plato's Republic, or more directly from the 7th century encyclopedist Isidore of Seville, who speaks of the fates in the same manner, may be admitted here. Yet there may have been an early belief in three fates, even if these names are influenced from the sources mentioned. This is supported by the Voluspa passage about the three giant maids, if these are Norns, and by the Helgi poem, in which three Norns are implied. Three groups of Norns are known to the poet who wrote Fafnismal. This grouping into three may have reflected the chief functions of the Norns: giving life, giving good or evil destiny, and taking away life. The Norns, like the Valkyries, are sometimes called Disir, singular Dis. The Disir are linked to the Idisi of the Merseburg charm. This was used of a woman of higher rank and appears in such female names as Asdis, Vigdis, Freydis, but it generally betokens female supernatural beings. We do not know for certain that these were originally spirits of dead women. The word Disir is used generically and seems to include Norns, Valkyries, and Kynfulgur. This was applied to goddesses. Freya was the Vanadis, or Lady of the Vanir, and Skadi, the Ondurdis, or Snowshoe Lady. The word is used in the sagas to denote spirits, and Spadisir is used of armed female guardian spirits and of prophetic women. Whatever the Disir were, sacrifice called Disablot was offered to them, apparently at harvest or in winter. The Heimskringla tells how King Adils was at a Disablot in Uppsala and rode his horse through the Disalsar, or Hall of the Disir. The horse tripped and fell, and the king was killed. In connection with this Disablot, there was a market and a Disathing or court, the name surviving as that of a fair called Distingen. The Disablot is mentioned in other sagas, example, the Hervarar saga. A great Disablot was held at King Alf's at harvest time. Alfhild performed the sacrifice, and in the night, as she was reddening the high place, Starkard carried her away. A trace of a cult of the Norns is also seen in Saxo's story of Fridleif. Certain survivals point to the nature of the cult and show how the belief in these or similar goddesses of fate continued in later times. The German penitential of the Corrector has the following question asked of women: Hast thou, as certain women at certain times do, prepared a table in thy house, and placed food and drink with 3 knives, that if those sisters called by the ancient parquet come, they are there refreshed? And dost thou believe that they are able now or in the future to benefit thee? The penitential of Baldwin of Exeter in 12th century also condemns this custom, performed in hope of good gifts being bestowed on children. The Corrector cites as an example of a gift conferred by the parquet the power of changing into a wolf at will. In the Faroe Islands, the Norna Grettur, or Norn groats, is the first food eaten by a mother after childbirth, a relic of an earlier offering to the Norns, who are supposed to show their goodwill to a child by setting marks on its nails, the Norna spor. Those who have white marks are believed to be lucky. Traces of this are found in Norse and German folklore. White nail marks betoken that something new or pleasant is about to happen. The medieval belief in fays, or in a group of 3 fays, seemed to have had its origin, especially as they were associated with the birth of children, the prosperity of a household, or the death of its members, in 3 sources: the Roman parquet, the Celtic Dei Matres, and the Scandinavian Norns, possibly also the Valkyries. In Teutonic folk story, 3 beings like fays, though sometimes of the hag kind, are found. Example, in The Three Spinners and its variants. Such beings appeared suddenly, haunted wells, bestowed gifts on children, and span. Two of them might promise a good, and the third an evil, destiny. The belief in Nornir and Valkyries must have been carried to France by the Northmen, and there have influenced the Fey superstition. The practice of placing food for the parquet already noted is referred to in Guillaume au Courtenay, and in La Jus de la Feuille of Adam Le Bossu, three Fays visit a house in Arras where a table has been set for them, but as no knife has been provided for one of them, she bestows ill fortune. The same custom was long observed in Brittany and Provence, where, at a birth or on the last day of the year, a table was spread for three Fays in order to propitiate them and cause them to bring prosperity to the household or endow the child with happiness, just as, in Iceland, food was set out for the elves in order that they might be propitious to the household. The Wyrd is represented in English and Scots by weird. Example, he maun dree his weird, or suffer his destiny. Some link with Teutonic fate goddesses is therefore to be found in the three weird sisters of our earlier literature. Holinshed relates that three women, in strong and fairly apparel, resembling creatures of an elder world, met Macbeth and Banquo and foretold their destinies. These women were either the weird sisters, that is the goddess of the destiny, or else some nymphs or fairies, endued with knowledge or prophecy by their necromantical science. They are Shakespeare's witches or weird sisters, the Fatai or Parquet of Boyce's history. A story of the weird sisters is mentioned in The Complaint of Scotland, but it is now unknown, and the additions to Warner's Albion's England, 1616 AD, speak of the weird elves, as Spencer has three fatal imps in his Ruins of Time, and Chaucer the fatal sustrin, or sisters, akin to the weird Lady of the Woods in Percy's Ballad, who prophesied from a cave about Lord Albert's child, then stole him away and nurtured him. Whatever the ultimate origin of the Norns and similar dispensers of destiny may have been, they had human counterparts in actual prophetesses or magic wielders, like the old Scots' spae-wife, who foretold an infant's future, or the Norse spakona or volva. In some references to these, it is not easy to say where the human aspect ends and the supernatural begins. As Grimm says, prophesying, inspiring, and boon-bestowing women were always supposed to pass through the country, knocking at the house of those whom they would bless. And tales of travelling gifting sorceresses were much in vogue all through the Middle Ages. In the story of Nornagest, the Norns are called Volor and Spakonur, and are said to travel through the land. In Viga Glum's saga, a Volva or spae-wife called Oddebjorg goes about the land, prophesying and telling stories, her prophecies depending on the kind of entertainment which she receives. Quite possibly, the supernatural Norns were a reflection of such actual women who claimed and were believed to possess powers of prophecy and even of influence on human destiny. Chapter 24. Valkyries. The Valkyries attained their greatest development in Viking times, with the growth of war and of Odin as war god and chief deity, and skaldic poetry doubtless aided in this. Yet their personality is of more remote origin. The Valkyrior, singular Valkyria, means choosers of the slain, valor, the host of the slain, that is, in battle, and kjosa, to choose, a word used for the acceptance of sacrifice by a god. They were also called Valmeyjar, or battle maids, Hjalmeyjar, or helmet maids, Oskmeyjar, or wish maids, because they performed the wish of Odin, or perhaps adopted maids, that is, adopted by Odin, just as dead warriors in Valhall were his adopted sons, Oskasjunir. Herians, or Odin's Desir. The names Hjalmvitir, Folkvitir, and Sarvitir, meaning respectively helmet, battle, and wound white, also occur. To these names correspond the Sigwif or Sigurmeyjar. Snorri describes them in their final form. They serve in Valhall, carry drink, and attend to the table service and other flagons. Odin sends them to every battle. They choose or determine men's fairness and award victory. Guth, Rota, and Skuld, the youngest Norn, right to choose, or kjosa, the slain and decide fights. The Eddic poems have several references to purely supernatural Valkyries, and also to Valkyries who are maidens of mortal descent with certain supernatural powers. The latter are found in the heroic poems. In Grimnismal, Odin tells how certain Valkyries bring the horn at his will, and carry beer to the warriors in Valhall. These are Rist, or Shaker, Mist, or Mist, Skegjold, or Axe Time, Skogul, or the Raging One, Hild, or Warrior, Thrud, or Might, Hlok, or the Shrieker, or the Fete, Järfjötur, or Host Fete, Gol, or Geironol, or Spear Bearer, Randgrid, or Shield Bearer, Ratgrid, or Plan Destroyer, and Reginleif, or Companion of the Gods. Other names are found in Voluspa and in the sagas. The Valkyries ride to the battlefield, helmeted, their byrnies red with blood, sparks flying from their spears. Lightning accompanies them. Or, as in another account, they fly from heaven, helmet maids, wound givers. War follows their appearance, and a splendid description of their assembling, ready to ride over the earth, occurs in Voluspa. They ride through air and sea, 3, 9, or thrice 9 in number, one riding first. Their horses shake themselves. From their manes drop dew in the dales and hail on the lofty trees, bringing fruitfulness to men. They exercise care over heroes dear to them, and guard their ships. If the allusion to Valkyries in the flying between Sinfjolti and Gudmund in Helgak Vidar Hundingsbana is based on myth, then the warriors in Valhall fought for the possession of some of them. Sinfjotli says of Gudmund, "Thou wast, evil witch, a Valkyrie, loathsome and malicious, in Odin's hall. The warriors must have a fight, wilful woman, on thy account." Where the Valkyries come to the battlefield, the wolf, or the horse of the giantess, and their birds, the ravens, are gorged with the slain. Hence such kennings for battle as Storm, or Stormwind of the Valkyries, or Hild's Game. At Baldur's funeral, Frigg and the Valkyries rode with Odin. In the Volsunga saga, Ljod, daughter of the giant Rimnir, is Odin's Oskmer, or wish, or adopted maid. And when Reri played for a child, Odin and Freya heard, and Ljod was sent to him with an apple, flying in the form of a crow and dropping it into his lap. Eventually she married Volsung, the child granted to Rerir. Like gods and heroes, the Valkyries ride on horses, and also hover over battlefields, sent by Odin to choose those who are to fall, perhaps to cause their death, to award victory, and to lead the chosen to Valhall, where they serve them with ale. Freya also chose the slain, and was called Valfreya, and possessor of the slain, and she poured ale in Valhall on one occasion. The appearing of the Valkyries indicated battle. Glum dreamed that two women sprinkled blood over the land from a trough, a prophecy of the fighting which was to follow. In the verse attached to the story, these women are called goddesses, and a host of divine beings riding over the land. In the Sturlunga saga, there is a dream about two blood-stained women rowing in a boat, while blood dropped around. One of them sang that they were Gun and Gondul, and that blood rained before men fell in fight. This was an omen of fighting in Iceland. Before Harold Hardradi sailed for England, Gerd dreamed of a woman holding a short sword and a trough of blood, and thought of a woman sitting on a wolf with a corpse in its mouth. These dream women are of the Valkyrie kind. The skulls picture Odin sending Valkyries to choose the slain and conduct them to Valhall. Bragi's song of Lodbrok ends. Home bid me the Valkyries, whom from high Valhall Odin hither sent to me. Gladly ale with Aesir shall I drink in high seat. In the Hakonarmal on Hakon's death, the Valkyries Gondul and Skogul are sent by Odin to choose among the kings of one of the race of Yngvi Frey to enter his service. They go to the battlefield. The king is dying. Gondul says that the god's army is waxing great now that Hakon and a host are coming to Valhall. Hakon sees the Valkyries mounted, with helmets and shields, and asks why deserved victory was withheld. Skogul says that thus they had arranged it. Hakon kept the field till his enemies fled. Now the Valkyries must ride to the city of the gods to tell Odin that a mighty king is coming to him. In the earlier Eiriksmal, Odin awakes from a dream in which he had bidden the heroes prepare the benches and fill the beer vats, and the Valkyries to beer the wine, as if a king and host were coming. This precedes the coming of Eirik to Valhall. The punishment of Sigurdrifa, or Brynhild, by Odin shows that a Valkyrie might be self-willed and not carry out Odin's wishes. Odin had promised victory to Jarlmungnar, but the Valkyrie slew him in battle, favoring his opponent Agnar. Odin pricked her with a sleep thorn, which caused her to sleep till Sigurd waked her, and said that she would never again win victory in battle, but would be married. She was bound by the spell in a shield tower, surrounded by fire, on a high mountain. The heroic poems of the Edda show that heroic women of mortal birth were regarded by the poets as Valkyries, endowed with supernatural power. Brunhild, daughter of Budli, is either confused with a Valkyrie of that name, or herself regarded as one. Oddrun bids her wear the helmet and say that she will be a wish-maid, but she is described in human terms. She is the victory-bringer, Sigurdrifa, a word regarded as a proper name, that of a Valkyrie different from Brunhild. She rides her horse Vingskornir and wears helmet and coat of mail. Svava, daughter of King Eilimi, is called a Valkyrie, one of 9 whom Helgi sees riding. She gives him his name and tells him where to find a superb sword. Sigrun, daughter of King Hogni, is a third human Valkyrie. Helgi saw the Valkyries coming and addressed Sigurd, here called the Southern Dis, and in the sequel married her. According to the poet, Sigrun was reborn as the Valkyrie Kara. The epithets applied to these heroines are those which would be applied to supernatural Valkyries: white, fair, with hemmed head, bright in corslet, sun-bright, with clear, brilliant hue, gold-decked, richly decked with gold. Sometimes Valkyries are characterized as coming from or belonging to the south. Sutron, Drosser Sutroner, southern women, Disser Sutroner, and this is true of Sigrun. These heroine Valkyries shield their favorites in battle, protect their ships, and bring ill to their foes. Brunhild also taught magic runes to Sigurd. Were beings like Valkyries known in other parts of the Teutonic area? The Odyssey of the Merseburg charm in South Germany correspond to the Disir among whom Valkyries were included. The charm says that the Odyssey sat down. Some fastened bonds, presumably on enemy prisoners. Some held back the host, perhaps by magic or by taking part in the fight. Some tugged at the fetters, that is, of prisoners whom they favored. By repeating this charm, which must refer to some myth about the Odyssey and their actions, and by adding, leap forth from the bonds, escape the enemy, fetters were supposed to be unloosed. The actions of the Odyssey correspond to some decree to what underlies the names of certain Valkyries, that is, Hlok, if this means fetter, and Herfjötur, or fetter of the host, or perhaps panic terror, such as is indicated by the word Herfjötur, thus holding back the enemy by terror. In the Hardar saga, it is said that over Hord the Herfjot is come, but he got rid of this magic band, Galdraband, on 2 occasions. On the third he was overcome by it and slain. The Sturlunga saga gives several examples of this passing terror, followed by death. Herfjötur, or panic terror, befell men in battle or seeking security in flight. Thus, Gudmund and Svartofdi were fleeing from Illugi when the former fell back. His companion asked him if Herfjötur had come over him. Illugi now gained upon him and slew him. The Odyssey who lose fetters recall the magic runes for losing chains in Havamal and Svipdagsmal. In the Odyssey, as a group of female spirits of war, we may thus see an old Germanic source of the later, more specialized Norse group of Valkyries, of whom Herfjötur would be the spirit or goddess who causes paralyzing terror, thus making the enemy as if bound with fetters. In the field of battle, which, as Tacitus says, was called Idistaviso by the Cheruscans, or according to the suggested reading which has won general acceptance, Idisiaviso, some have seen a place called after the Odyssey, Field of the Odyssey, as if they had aided in a victory there. Odyssey means women, or, more definitely, supernatural women. The Anglo-Saxon word Wælkirj, or equivalent of Valkyrie, is glossed Bellona, Erinyes, Tisiphone, Parca, Venefica. Another gloss speaks of eyes as Wælkirgian Egan, or Gorgonius, as if their eyes were terrible as a gorgon's. The Wælkirg was thus a sinister being, and other references rather suggest a supernatural witch than a Valkyrie. The older war maidens may have degenerated into witch-like beings, An Anglo-Saxon charm against pain supposed to be inflicted by a little spear thrown by supernatural beings from the air calls it Esa Geskot, Ylfa Geskot, Haegdesan Geskot, short of Aesir, of elves, of witches. Though the charm refers more immediately to witches, these are described rather as Valkyries riding through the air. Loud were they, yea, loud as the road over hills, haughty were they as the road over lands. Then it speaks of these mighty women mustering their hosts and sending forth their whizzing spears. Wulfstan, Archbishop of York, 1022 to 23 AD, referring to Danish invaders and Anglo-Saxon traitors, says of them that here in England there are witches and Waelkirgien. Thus the name had become one of ill omen. The word Sigwyf, or victorious women, mentioned in the charm, may point to the older functions of the Anglo-Saxon Waelkirg, though here referring merely to bees, the charm forming a blessing of bees. Kemble renders it, Sit ye, victorious women, descend to earth, never fly ye wildly to the wood, be ye as mindful to me of good, as every man is of food and landed possessions. Bees were supposed to have prophetic powers. Saxo's Virginis Sylvestris in the Hotherus story resemble Valkyries in their functions, taking part invisibly in battle, giving victory to their favorites, governing the fortunes of war. But they have traits of the Waldfrauen of German lore, and also of fays and elfins. Very often a hero, misled by a mist as Hotherus was, meets supernatural beings in a wonderful dwelling, which afterwards vanishes with them. This glamour incident runs through all folk belief and occurs in Snorri's Edda. The woodland traits of Saxo's Valkyries recall the Valkyrie swan maidens of Volundarkvita, as we shall see in the next chapter. Thus, supernatural women resembling Valkyries were known elsewhere than in Norway. In their power over the fate of men in battle and their prophetic gifts as displayed, example by Brunhild and by the Virginis Sylvestris in Saxo's story, who, by auspicious ductibus, decide the fortunes of war, the Valkyries have affinity with the Norns, the youngest of whom, Skald, is said to be a Valkyrie. The Valkyries in Volundarkvita are spinners, like the Norns, and one is called Alvitr, or all-wise. An episode in the Njal saga is also significant. Before the Battle of Clontarf in 1014 AD between Irishmen and Norsemen, Daurud in Caithness had a vision in which he saw 12 women riding through the air to a bower, while blood dropped from the sky. Looking in, he saw them engaged in a horrible kind of weaving. The reels and shuttles were arrows and a sword, the spindle spears, the weights men's heads, the web was of human entrails. They sang a song, the Daurudardljod, given in the saga, as they wove the web from the coming battle and prophesied the course of the future. This weaving song shows that the women were Valkyries, about the right to the fight, guiding its destinies, and, as corpse-choosing spirits, taking charge of the slain. Their gruesome weaving forebodes the course of the fight, and the woof is war-winning. The weaving ended, they tore the web in two. 6 rode to the north with one piece, 6 to the south with the other. Their prophecy will now come to pass. A similar conception of weaving fates of warriors occurs in Beowulf, in the phrase Vigspeda Givulfu, the weavings of victory, as if a battle's fate were woven by higher powers. The Norse wove the fate of men in general. Valkyries could be represented as weaving the fate of battle and the fateful death of warriors. Norns and Valkyries are both included among the Disir, the Valkyries being Herians Disir and Sigrun, the southern Dis. Snorri speaks of the kennings for women as the names of goddesses, Valkyries, Norns, and Disir. In the Asmundar saga, Asmund saw in a dream women with weapons standing over him, telling him he was singled out for supremacy, and that they, his Padisir, would aid him against his enemies. These women are like Valkyries, but also resemble the weapon-bearing guardian spirits of Hamingjur. The Valkyries have also, like the Norns, a prophetic aspect. Their appearance foretells battle, as already indicated, usually through a dream of women pouring blood out of a trough, as examples in the sagas show. Besides having affinity with the Norns, the Valkyries have some traits of swan maidens, as we shall see in the next chapter. To what earlier conception may the later aspect of the Valkyries be traced? They resemble the war goddess or war spirits of Irish mythology, whose symbols or incarnations were scald crows, just as ravens were connected with Valkyries. Chogs of the Valkyries. Such Germanic war spirits would not at first be strictly personalized. Rather would they be a group, like the Odyssey. Some then became more definitely personal, like the German war goddess of inscriptions, Vihansa, Hariasa, Harimella, or the goddess Baduhenna mentioned by Tacitus. The derivations of these names show that the goddesses were connected with war and the host, and the name Baduhenna is cognate to that of the Irish war goddess Badb. With the growing dominance of Odin and the warrior Valhall conception, the Valkyries took the more definite shape as Odin's servants. The passage already cited from Helgakvida Jorvad Sonar seems to connect them with the fruitfulness of the earth, but unless they and their steeds are poetically regarded as clouds dropping dew and moisture, they do not seem to have been regarded as nature spirits. As war spirits, the Valkyries may be reflections of actual female warriors, such as were known in Germanic custom and referred to by Flavius Vopiscus, Dio Cassius, and Paulus Diaconus. These are the shield maids, Skaldmeier, of the Huns, spoken of in Atlak Vita, and apparently known also in Scandinavia. They took part in the famous Bravalla battle, according to the Sogobrot and Saxo, who says that they had women's bodies but souls of men. Saxo also speaks of Alfhild, daughter of Sigvard, king of the Goths, who was a sea rover with other like-minded maidens, and of Danish women who dressed as men and devoted themselves to war. They offered war rather than kisses, and preferred fighting to love. Such shield maids may have given a hint for the existence of war spirits, and it is possible that the ghosts of such women may have been regarded as spirits carrying on warfare in the unseen, as the spirits of warriors did, and so becoming spirits of battle, Odyssey and Valkyries. A curious belief, perhaps based on memories of shield maids and their ghosts, is found in the penitential of the German Corrector, in a question asked of an alleged witch. Dost thou believe, as certain women are accustomed to believe, that in the silence of the night, when the doors are closed, thou, with other members of the devil, are raised in the air even to the clouds, and there dost fight with others, giving and receiving wounds? The derivation of the Valkyries from nightmare demons, favored by some scholars, rests mainly on the idea of the Herfottur as indicating panic terror, a paralysis of the limbs equivalent to the effect supposed to be caused by the nightmare demon. But as only one Valkyrie bears a name, Herfjötur, resembling Herfjötur, such a derivation is hardly likely. The German Walridersk, or Rider of the Dead, is thought to be a folk survival of the Valkyries in this earlier aspect. There is no reason, however, to go beyond their origin in actual war spirits.